Well, let's go ahead and get started. It's 9:02. I want to welcome everybody to the August 16th RUC Steering Committee meeting. We'll go ahead and start the meeting. I'll ask Ryan to go ahead and call the roll.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Barkas. Bo Perschbacher. Representative Ramos.
I'm Hunter. I'm his legislative assistant. I'm filling in for him today.
Thanks, Hunter. Brian Ziegler.
Great Mobility Board is present.
Bryce Yaden.
I'm here.
Chris Herman.
Reports are present.
Kurt Augustine. Senator King. David Burnett. Doug Vaughn.
Morning.
Representative Orcutt.
Here. Good morning, Judy.
Good morning.
Representative Fye.
I am present.
Jane Wall. Janet Ray. Jason Richter. Josh Brown.
Present.
Justin Layton. Commissioner Fukai.
I'm here.
Mayor Pauly. Neil Strigg.
I'm here. Good morning.
Senator Fortunato.
Here.
Senator Saldana. Sharon Nelson. Ted Trepanner.
Looks like Ted just joined.
I see you, Ted.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Took me a minute to get on.
Tom Hingston, excuse me.
Here.
Tom Walrath. Debbie Driver. Senator Elias. Representative Cliburn.
Here.
And Commissioner Jennings.
Here.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so today we'll be receiving updates on from the project team on several activities to include an update on the equity and finance analysis research task, the overview of the pilot preparation, including some usability testing that was just completed, and we'll get an overview and a preview of the pilot, which will be launching later this fall. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand this off to Travis to get us started. Take it away, Travis.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Can you see my screen? Yes. Okay. See some heads nodding over there. Good morning, and thanks all for joining. I'm going to have a very brief update today and then be passing it off to a few colleagues who will provide a more in-depth summary of findings from our recent user experience research, and also a look ahead to the plans for later this fall, including hopefully all of your involvement in our RUC simulation at the November steering committee, which will be in person back at CTAC. But just to set the stage, I wanted to start with the overall project status update for the Forward Drive project, which is the current name of this phase of federally funded research by the Commission. Quickly update on the equity research and financial analysis findings, which were two of the major early research tasks. And then I'll do a brief preview of the last item on pilot testing before handing it off to our colleagues. So by way of context, you may recall this project had 7 tasks. You see them listed over on the left-hand side. The first 4 were research-oriented tasks, and the remaining tasks were pilot testing and reporting. Across the top, you see some stars. The purple star is today. The others are the steering committee meetings we've had throughout the course of the Forward Drive project, and we will be working with REMA and the commissioners and all of you to be looking ahead to scheduling a couple of meetings for 2023 as we get into the pilot testing and wrap up. The financial analysis is largely complete as it was scoped, but we're going to leave the task open. That's why you see the dotted lines, and I'll talk a little bit more about why in just a moment. The equity research was completed in June. The final report is published. And again, that one also is dotted line open, meaning we're looking to confirm some of our findings and hypotheses through pilot testing. The same is true for task 3, which was the research and RUC innovation task, as well as task 4 on cost reduction. Again, these tasks are all research tasks that are largely complete, but we're looking to continue the learnings and findings through the pilot testing. Pilot planning is just about wrapped up. That was task 5. That was taking all the findings from the research and putting together a plan, which we presented a draft to you all back in December, which was the last time we had a formal full steering committee meeting, but we also had an update during a spotlight session earlier this year. The pilot testing, as Stephen and Jingjing will present later today, it's been sort of renamed a little bit, but it's going to launch later this fall. In fact, probably launching at the steering committee meeting in November. And then finally, we have until the end of 2023 to complete the final reporting back to FHWA, who is the sponsor of this research. Just to close the loop, and glad to see Allegra on the line today, with big thanks to Allegra and Henry Yates as well, who was also here. Allegra led this research task, and Henry Yates and Linda Kennedy led the outreach. We've posted the final report from the equity research to the project website, waroadusagecharge.org. We've had many presentations on it to the steering committee, as well as spotlight sessions and commission presentations. But the complete findings are now available and published online. The same is the case for the financial analysis. We've updated the financial modeling tool and documented it. That report is also available online. And for those of you who weren't able to attend the spotlight session that we had in May, and I believe most of you were, so I won't belabor this too much, but we had a presentation of findings from using the financial model. Here's a snapshot of what the interface looks like. We wanted it to be a relatively user-friendly interface. This has been passed on to commission staff, which allows users to basically configure any version of the future that they would like, click a few buttons, and then see the outputs as far as what that does for transportation revenue, as well as the cost of collection and other outputs of interest. So as you may all recall, we had presented a number of different scenarios. They're named in the lower right corner: neutral, cruise control, overdrive, shared drive, low gear. These are all names of scenarios that reflect different possible future transitions to electrification of the vehicle fleet, as well as different assumptions about the return to quote unquote normal from COVID pandemic days of reduced driving. So it's possible to, as a user of the model, to simply select one of those scenarios as you configure your policy choices, or to customize and create a scenario of your own for factors like the growth in VMT, growth in electrification of vehicles, and growth in fuel economy, and so forth. One of the things we presented in the spotlight back in May was just a handful of outputs of each of the 5 scenarios with a standard set of policy assumptions. This is the full dashboard of outputs that you would get from any given run of the financial modeling tool. You can see in the upper left, gas tax revenue in gray, RUC revenue in orange, but also some charts on the cost of collection as a percent of revenue, how the costs break down, and a few other key metrics. What we ran through back in May at the Spotlight were for each of the 5 preset scenarios under one specific policy assumption about transitioning toward a road usage charge over about a 10-year period for new vehicles, what that would look like in terms of fuel tax receipts, again in gray, and RUC receipts in orange. So I'll flip through these fairly quickly. Don't want to belabor the findings too much, since we had a thorough Spotlight session on this back in May, but you can see the difference in the assumptions that you make from one scenario to the next, from neutral to cruise control to overdrive, which assumes more miles traveled, so therefore higher levels of revenue. We added a scenario that assumes a 2030 ban on gasoline vehicle sales, just to see what it does, and indeed it leads to a much swifter decline in fuel tax receipts. And then low gear, which was basically a slower transition to electric vehicles and fuel efficient vehicles. So you see the fuel tax receipts in this scenario a little bit higher out in the outer years of the model. One of the reasons I wanted to present these was to invite all the members of the steering committee, if you have specific interest in a transition scenario, policy choices, or specific thoughts about which of the economic scenarios, we invite you to ask us to, if you'd like to see specific results. So for example, we had one member ask about what would it look like if we transitioned to a road usage charge only starting with new vehicles in 2027. So what we were able to generate using the model is under the do nothing scenario, you see the gasoline tax revenue on the left in blue. And if you transition all new vehicles to road usage charging starting in 2027, on the right-hand side, you see that blue line reflects what the gasoline tax receipts would be. In the orange shaded area shows the combined revenue from fuel tax and RUC. So the area above the line in orange represents the revenue from road usage charging in a new vehicle transition scenario starting in 2027. The model basically can handle just about any transition scenario, whether new vehicles, vehicles by MPG, in just about any year. So if there's interest in looking at specific scenarios, whether policy scenarios or economic scenarios, we're happy to take those suggestions and run them and provide the results back to you. So this is just a general invitation to each of you, if you'd like to see the results, to make your requests to Rima, and she'll get them to the project team. So that kind of recaps where we are with the research, the background research. Moving into the user experience research and pilot testing, we basically have divided this into 2 phases. The first phase being user research, and the second phase being what we're now calling RUC basic and follow-on experiences. So the user research is aimed at developing concepts and refining concepts for how customers would interact with a RUC system. That's what Gabriel Post will present first today. And then RUC basic and follow-on experience is what Stephen and Jingjing will present later this morning. This is where we're actually in the process of developing a prototype that we can deploy with hundreds of volunteers, including all of you, and evaluate the experience and results. So a lot more to come on both of those. But just to frame those presentations and tie it back to the objectives of the Forward Drive program overall, we had 3 overarching objectives that we distilled for this phase of research based on both the grant proposal as well as some legislative directives. We wanted to understand and improve the user experience. We wanted to figure out ways to reduce the cost of collection. We wanted to incorporate equity through not only policy, but also system design choices. So you'll see these 3 themes recur throughout the presentations today. And lastly, just to run through a few of the components of the current phase of research that you'll hear about. On the left-hand side, we have this whole notion of user experience research, interacting with volunteers through simulations and pilot testing and whatnot, to inform policy choices and system design choices, and a number of features that we're looking to get customer feedback on. So you'll hear about what we're now calling RUC Basic, which is basically self-reporting of odometer readings at the registration renewal point or at potentially other points, alternative invoice designs, accommodations or discounts for low-income vehicle owners, and mileage reporting choices, offering different mileage reporting choices. The bottom three in italics are what we're calling the follow-on experiences. So that would be telematics, offering installment payments, and then exemptions for non-chargeable miles without requiring the use of any technology or GPS. We're also doing field research in parallel, and these are unregistered vehicle research, vehicle transaction research, and a mock standards committee. So more to come on all these later today, but just wanted to frame the later presentations within the broader context of where we are in the project. And with that, I'm happy to pause and take any questions.
Sorry, I couldn't find to raise my hand. You there, Travis?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Fortunato.
I know you said we're going to cover this a little bit later, but the equity or the lower income stuff, can you just give us a brief overview of how you anticipate that, a lower RUC rate?
Sure. The basic concept that we were asked to investigate was, would it be feasible to incorporate an income-based discount on the road usage charge? So there's both that's obviously a policy choice to be made. What we were looking at is, what are the ways you could operationalize something like that if you wanted to do it? Could you leverage existing rosters, if you will, of state assistance programs that households already qualify for and link it to the RUC payment so that it's an easy enrollment, for example? And what is the nature of the discount? How is it offered? How is it presented to customers? How do they interact with it? Do they even choose it? Do they value it? So you'll see in some of the presentations how we attempted to present that choice and get feedback on it from an operational standpoint, recognizing that it's obviously a policy choice to be made by the legislature, whether to even offer that.
Yeah, did anybody do any analysis on uniformity of taxation? If that conflicted with the uniformity of taxation clause? Because now we're given dissimilar rates based on income. Anybody look at that? Or
Can you clarify, is there a statutory reference that's requiring this uniformity, or is it I'm not familiar with that, I guess.
yeah, that's that little minor constitutional uniformity of taxation clause.
So within the Constitution, yeah.
Right.
I don't think we've
No.
specifically assessed that, but I don't believe this would be in violation of that, but we certainly could take a focused look at that to confirm. I don't know,
No.
Travis, if it's not coming up as something we've specifically assessed in this process.
We need to, because I recall hearing the question at the last one. I think I did a cursory check, but we need to report back on whether there would be any conflict. My recollection from the little work we did was it wouldn't be, but certainly Senator will do a more thorough check on the legal ramifications.
I don't know. I guess the question comes in is whether somebody calls it a tax or a charge. But I mean, we're not giving a discount currently to lower income people based on gas tax.
Right.
So this is really a shift. So that's a concern. I like the fact that you're continuing to do the non-technical approach, which is just simply do this at the registration process and perhaps have people fill out an affidavit if they went out of state. I know some of the concerns will be people cheating, but the amount of cheating compared to the cost of collection would be significantly less than the cost of collection. So anyway, those are a couple of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Orcutt.
Thank you. Kind of a follow-up on Senator Fortunato asking about whether there's a shift. when you're looking at this, are you looking at there being a net revenue reduction to the state if we're giving a lower rate to any particular group? Or are you looking at collecting the same amount and shifting the burden from lower income to medium income?
Our testing is more about the operations of how to implement a discount. You'll see we've kind of picked a notional number of 20%, but again, that's just for testing purposes. We understand that it would be a policy choice. So we haven't made any prescriptions in our research or analysis about whether any reduction in revenue would be backfilled by raising the rate on others or simply letting it go. Obviously, the whole notion of RUC would be it's replacing a decreasing revenue source, so it's more than you might otherwise get, but less than you would get if everyone paid the same rate. So we haven't made any choices in regard to that policy choice for our research, if that helps. Commissioner Jennings, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I'm trying to look at my screen, which is overtaken by the presentation, but unless there's others, I believe that's all I have for today.
Nobody else has a raised hand. All right, next up, Gabriel will give us a pilot presentation, findings from participants, usable research. Take it away, Gabriel.
You bet. Thank you very much, Chairman. Can everyone see the screen that I'm sharing now? Super. All right. Let me just give a couple slides of context so that you all know where I'm coming from. I'm Gabriel Post. I come from Teague, a design firm that's local to Washington in the Seattle area. And just to give you a little bit more context on it, in case you don't have it, I apologize if some of this is repeat, I'll keep it brief, but effectively, we are a small agency that basically combines our expertise in technology and really design and a deep understanding of human behavior, which is the research side that we'll speak to today to help deliver on what's next. And of course, RUC is a perfect example of bringing that together. We certainly serve a lot of clients, and our sort of most recent way to speak about ourselves is we love tackling large, challenging problems that are sort of systemic in nature. And RUC, the road usage charge, is absolutely one of those. The ability to potentially influence policy on the one hand, but also the practical utility that all Washingtonians will go through on a website is something that we hold dear, and we were very honored to be a part of on this program. Just so you understand a little bit about how we tackle programs, I threw this slide in here as well from a sense of process. On the left side of this, we're really asking the questions through various forms of research. Are we making the right thing? And again, for us, is the simulation that we are building, what can we learn from it so that we can build the right thing someday? And then downstream, we also work toward making that thing right. And I think a little bit of this program was some of that as well. Because again, we put several experience steps together. We even nicknamed it internally the jagged pill, because we knew it was going to catch some of the visitors off guard, but we did it on purpose to try to get feedback so that we could improve it for all. And then this is the last slide just on introduction. On the left side here, it really talks about understanding customers, end users, developing empathy for them, understanding their environments and whatnot, and then collaborating with them and of course with you all to help drive the most ideal future. And then ultimately the thinking through making again is the fact that we kind of got dirty and built an actual functioning prototype with folks, put it in front of people, and that's how we were able to get our feedback. So again, I won't belabor us or our process anymore, but I wanted to let you know what we did is core. And we're again proud to have done it for our home state. So with that, The start of the formal presentation here, again, we did a simulation. This was part of a program that I'll speak about in a minute. And I'm here today to share out some insights from that research, as well as some tactics that will go forward in the next version of the simulation. A lot of words on this slide, so I'll speak to it a bit here as well. I just wanted to be clear about what the objective was for our research. We were here to really gauge the public. Again, we have a cross section of 48 people that we spoke to that meet various attributes, so that we had a range of all different types of people. And we really wanted to understand, did they comprehend road usage charge, how we positioned it to them, how did they feel about it, and even what were their preferences if they didn't like things about how it could be improved. We did that through like 90-minute conversations with, again, 48 people. So a lot of data that drove this. And again, these insights are what drives the design process, and it gives us a rationale that we can support by sort of firsthand reference. One slide here on what design research is, the type of research. Of course, this photo is showing it in person, but we went through great length to have sessions that were facilitated through Zoom, much like this call, where we actually had the user on the other side share their screen back. We had them click into a web link and share their screen back and talk about everything that they clicked through and go through that experience journey with them. So design research is ultimately a method where we observe firsthand. We had them share video and, of course, their mouse actions. We were able to ask Q&A, question and answer, for that interview, but then again, collaborate with them and get them to push the envelope about what it is that they wished and how it is that they felt about it in a very sort of honest fashion. So the course of the engagement with Teague and CDM Smith, and therefore by virtue the rest of the transportation committee here, is ultimately several months. You can see there's maybe 3 or 4 months as the total arc. I'm going to present predominantly the last 2 parts of this, but just so you have a sense of the beginning, there was a real definition of what RUC means and what a simulation tool would mean. And we took into account, what's happening with users in the tab renewal steps that they currently have. So we did an audit there. We also looked at similar reference experiences, for example, TurboTax that users go through to kind of step through the process and walk them through similar types of things. We also developed a participant screener. Again, I'll speak a little later about who it is that we spoke to. And then we started to develop initial concepts and really shape them up for the actual design process, which was the next step. That's where we worked through, again, a website that we custom tailored and positioned many different opportunities to get feedback from users. And then, of course, we planned, recruited, and scheduled all of the participants that we spoke to. The research lasted about 4 weeks, again, with 48 individuals. We had moderated sessions. They were all recorded, so we have a mountain of data and the ability to go back and grab any of those things, so that there's a great reference point to reach in. We have several verbatims that are woven into this presentation. And then it ended with what we call synthesis, which is effectively bringing and sense making of all of the inputs. So analyzing research and collating that into a report, and that's some of what we're going to look at today. Some of the insights we've got and recommendations for downstream. Thanks. I see questions in the chat. I do have chat open to the side. Looks like Travis answered it. UX is user experience, and that's ultimately what it means for users to go through that website experience and the journey that they have within the RUC experience. Any other questions? All right. I will continue. If there's a clarifying question, you're most welcome to speak up and interrupt. There will be opportunity for more detailed questions as we get to the end. The next slide here, and this I think I can speak a little bit to the equity and inclusion point that was brought up earlier. We did a very purposeful job of selecting the people that we were going to talk to. There was quite a bit of effort put into developing which of these buckets there are, and also the attributes within each of them. Quite specifically, we spoke to 12 of the 48, so a full quarter of them met the specification for low income. And I even want to acknowledge that getting some low income members onto a website Zoom call was a challenge. So we even had some folks through their phone and we called through a landline to a specific individual as well to ensure that we had coverage of people that may not have regular access to computers and whatnot as well. So I just wanted to add that point. It's also important that we spoke to some people that were electric and hybrid drivers that are currently basically not paying the gas tax as it currently is all up. And I'll make the point while speaking about gas and hybrids, but it actually applied to several of the groups. I was actually surprised net how many people were aware of road use charge, the concept all up. And especially in the electric and hybrid, I'd say over half of the people in that particular group were aware of it and acknowledged that they're very aware that they were paying more on an annual tab basis and were curious about how contributions to road use were going to work out. The third group there, we kind of nicknamed them border crossers. And these are effectively, again, 25% of the folks, 12 participants. These are people that regularly drive either across state lines, across potentially native reservation lands, or potentially even on private roads. You can think farmland or whatnot. And in other words, they may spend the majority of their time driving on roads that may not be funded by Washington State or otherwise. So we wanted to get the perspective and opinions of them through the course of this as well. And then, of course, the final bucket over there is your average or your more typical drivers, of which we had a reasonable set of them. So I think with this mix of individuals, we got a good cross section that I think was representative of Washington residents. Our approach, I spoke a little bit about sort of design research all up, but specifically for the simulation that we built, again, participants engaged with a web-based simulation, a website. There's the first screen here is pictured on the right. And we basically took them through, I mentioned we had 90 minutes with them, and we used that 90 minutes to go through two scenarios. The first of which was their first year when they were first introduced to what road usage charge was, and they were estimating miles, et cetera, and even made a prepayment so that we could understand what that felt like. And then when they went through the second year tab renewal process, complete with adjustments and a final payment as well. One key thing that is important for us, especially since we were not in person but interacting through a website, is that we encouraged folks to really talk about the feelings and thoughts that they had in their minds, so that we could really get at the intent and the hopes and aspirations of the users while they were there. And again, I mentioned earlier, the site had a few purpose selected ways of presenting information to provoke users and to solicit feedback. So there was intentional elements for provocation, and we finessed it through some of the interviews and basically maximize the amount of output we could get from each of those sessions. Let me pause there just to make sure there's not a question in the back of people's heads. The next thing I will present is what that simulation looked like over the next 3 pages. Any clarifying questions? All right, I will continue through. So this was about a 12-screen process, if you will. So the next 3 pages are going to break that kind of in 4 steps each, just so you can understand what we sent those 48 people through. Their first step, really, we began them within the visual environment, the website that is the current tab renewal page. And we tried to probe them about how they felt about transitioning from this page potentially into a new RUC payment experience. And that's what step 2 is. You can see that we had a background change, still trying to imply Washington, definitely carrying the logo WA-RUC up top. But it was a transition into a new site with a presentation of information for people on that page so people could understand the basics about the program. And we really tried to understand how people felt about the program at that page and what types of things they might do to click around and explore the page. On that step 2 page, they were also faced with a selection, a choice. They could either do a fast checkout or they could customize. I'll kind of get to the insights and findings from that and what we learned from it. At this point, I just want to help us all understand what the process was they went through. From that step 3 is the sort of plan selection. They were able to choose, again, a plan that had a lot of presets. That's what the sort of fast checkout option was. Or they could choose a custom plan where they were able to choose and toggle all of the downstream option sets. And we wanted to understand how much people even understood the choice presented to them at this point, and approximately how many of the people wanted to choose which of the 2 paths. Step 4 got us into mileage reporting. No matter which of the 2 options they chose at the very first RUC screen there, they were still doing a form of mileage reporting. We also had photographic evidence upload opportunity here. There was a drop box. I'm sure we can't see it on the screen that is presented here, but ultimately we gave users the choice to upload photos from their phone, from their computer, etc., to basically prove the mileage that they were writing in text above. So that's a means of verification that we wanted to understand how users felt about it. The middle 4 steps here, I'll pick the pace up a little bit because I think the juicy stuff is going to come from the insights that we learned from it. Step 5 was about exemption reporting. This again would be individuals traveling either out of state or potentially on private land and whatnot. We'll find when we get to insights that some of the language and wording was a little bit confusing for users here. So we already started to lose some of the basic individuals when it got down to exemption reporting, just out of complexity. Step 6 was about mileage estimates. People really looking into the future to try to estimate what their future mileage would be. In year 1, this was kind of a shot in the dark for people. And in year 2, we were able to give them the opportunity to leverage same data as last year. So there were a number of drop-down options and for people to help through the process of estimating mileage. But we'll find when I speak to insights that that process for people was generally very uncomfortable, especially on a government website. Step 7 was then about reporting options. And this got to really get at the difference between potentially people self-reporting how many miles they've driven and how many exempt miles they will have driven. That's the basic option, if you will. But we also wanted to explore potential for advanced and automated reporting, things like telematics or using your device or even a gadget that might be installed into the vehicle itself. So ways to automate that reporting. So we have a lot of information and insight from users about how they felt and how they landed between these options. So that was a fantastic outcome of this study as well. Step 8, we spoke a little bit about earlier again on the income-based discounts. The way that our simulation tested this was we had about 10 different state assistive services that were a part of a dropdown, and we were able to solicit comments and feedback and whatnot from users, as well as get a sense if those 10 options solved the potential need for people that felt they did qualify for income-based discounts if that worked for them. So we learned a lot about that in step 8. And then rounding out the entire process, the last 4 screens was payment options. This is really where we learned about sort of prepayment, paying now versus paying later, as we articulated it on screen. Within that was also the option for pay later, was also the option to break payments into smaller, whether it be monthly or quarterly payments or whatnot. So we were exploring many different ways on behalf of the user to make the actual size of that payment be bite-sized and time appropriate for them. Step 10 was then review. This page may look a lot like an invoice, and I want to acknowledge that in a parallel path, we had an invoice that we were working on as well for a layout and an understanding from a user's point of view of what it is that users may expect on that invoice, how they would interpret it, what they would even do with an invoice. So there's a lot of insights that came down that path as well. And then step 11 was actually a confirmation screen. It was effectively the end of the RUC portion. You can see we brought back the sort of mountain background to bookend how it opened. But you'll find when we get to insights as well, this drew a lot of confusion for people. They thought they were maybe done, and there was a little bit of a misunderstanding by several that they were to kind of go back into what was step 12 then, the tab renewal, to finish the process. And we probed individuals on how they felt about potentially paying twice and the elements of a potentially disjointed experience. So we were able to suss all these things out, present them, and gather all up how users felt about it. Any clarifying questions or anything at this point as well? I know it's a lot of content and a lot of nuanced content, so I want to open it up if there is a question.
This is Tom Hinkson. Just to clarify on step 12, I can't really see it, but would the tab renewal experience be that you'd pay for your tabs and then you'd also pay for your RUC as a separate charge? So you'd just be paying more once a year as one potential scenario, or would those be combined?
The way that we presented it in this simulation was effectively two separate charges that occurred back to back.
Okay.
So, yeah. So basically, they paid in like step 10 and show the confirmation on step 11 for RUC, which is an additional new charge to them, effectively, not accounting for gas tax, removal at the pump, etc. But on step 12, they do go back into the complete tab renewal, and they do pay, again, their normal all up tab renewal charge. And we received the comments and discomfort relating to how that felt for people. So we have that packaged up and as a part of our full presentation.
Thank you.
It looks like there's another hand up.
Yeah, that's Senator Fortunato. You'll have to forgive me, I had to step away for just a minute, so you may have already covered this, but the way I had envisioned this happening is somebody would walk in to do their tabs, and they would, the sub-agent would be able to call up their screen that said, the last time you registered your car, you had so many miles on your car. Okay, so the sub-agent would have that information from the DOL. And so that person walks in and says, I want to register my car. And they say, well, how many miles are on your car now? And the person would tell them, and then they would say, okay, this is how much money you owe for your RUC. Was that the way that you envision this happening?
I think that is a ideal way for it to happen. I want to make sure Travis can respond here as well. To stay true to how we presented to consumers, first of all, we did basically the online renewal, which I believe is what the majority of consumers in Washington do today, renew online, but it's effectively the online version of going in and updating and getting your tabs and whatnot. However, we purposefully put people through this new experience to understand all the different parameters that are relating to it. I think in a simplified, perfect world, the opportunity for end users to admit to DOL what their new mileage odometer statement is for that year, and the state then have last year's mileage and an updated version of this year's mileage, effectively gives them the essential data without, of course, discounts and exemptions and whatnot. to basically at first order compute what their road usage charge is. In theory, it could then be integrated into the tab renewal process. But that is I think that's an aspirational thing that we didn't explicitly test, but we got a lot of feedback from users that that's what they wish would happen.
So
Yeah.
if I could continue, I had imagined that, for example, a person, in order to do this, the DOL would have to have an account for each person, which they have anyway with their car. So they would have to attach this road usage charge as a separate thing for the registration and all that. So DOL would keep track of this. And then, so somebody would have to have a DOL account for the road usage charge, which in my mind, I'm imagining, hey, you know what? I'm just going to send $25 a month into my road usage charge account at DOL. And then when I go to register my car, it's going to pop up and say, you have $250 in your road usage charge account. Your cost is $275, pay the difference. Or maybe you have an overage in there and then you're covered. That way people don't get hit with this $250, $300, $400 extra charge. So having a way of making monthly payments into an account. And then the whole thing, I would imagine, then we have to deal with how would somebody enter an affidavit of out-of-state miles, farm miles, whatever. Put those numbers in. Then when they go to sell the car dealer would have to do the same thing. The car dealer is going to have to call up the bank and say, how much does this person owe on the car? But he's also going to have to check DOL to see how much money they have in their account and how many miles they did it at their last thing, because the car dealer is going to have to collect or deduct or pay that whatever miles that they rode since they last registered their car. So was that kind of scenario taken into consideration all the way through to the sale of the car, or were we still in the rudimentary registering your vehicle phase?
I will say we were able to sniff out a lot of those questions. People brought up what happens when I get to car sale, but explicitly speaking, we didn't ask all 48 people about that process. Yeah.
Oh,
Gabriel,
yeah.
if I
So
could.
anyway, if we're going to do, yeah, if we're that, we sort of need to fine tune that as we get farther down the road. That's obvious. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just briefly, Senator Fortunato, wanted to add what you described, I think, is sort of the spirit of what we put customers through in this experience. The challenge, and we'll have the same challenge in the larger scale simulation later this fall, of being able to ask people, what's your odometer reading, and then compare it to last year's, is we had these people for 90 minutes. So their odometer reading at the beginning and the end was the same. So we couldn't really, in that time frame, simulate a full year. We had to sort of imagine that some time had elapsed. So we were able to get at the basic concept, but not in a real sense. We're hoping we can get closer in the larger scale simulation later this fall in simulating that. But because of the time constraints, we didn't do that. And then the second point about DOL and subagents, as Gabriel described, we didn't explicitly assume that this process would be integrated with DOL. We sort of sandwiched it in between the tab renewal beginning and end steps. But you could imagine that that's one possible place where this whole experience could go, including basically the steps that the customers went through would be the steps that the subagents would go through, except they'd be asking the customer across the counter for the information instead of the customers inputting it themselves. So fundamentally, the steps could apply, but we didn't make any assumptions about where they would apply.
Thank you.
Looks like Tom also has a question.
Yeah, this might be for you, Travis, or Gabriel. I don't know. When we're talking about affidavit or just looking at previous year's mileage and current year's mileage. And I've just been thinking about how you would confirm, reported life changes, basically. What was my primary car is now my second car, and it doesn't get as many miles. I retired, and now I only have, I only drive a few miles. I know that there are other reports that we fill out as consumers in other things, and people ask, well, what is the difference? Why is this different? I'm wondering how deep we have to get before we have a level of comfort that we are getting accurate information.
That's a good Gabriel question from the customer feedback on that point about trust. Gabriel, do you want to take that one or leave it for when you get into the findings about trust?
Yeah, maybe a bit into the findings about trust, and I apologize. I was reading through the next slides. You might have to read the specifics of the question. I thought it was planned on you. I apologize.
That's okay. The question was basically, how do we ascertain the validity of what is a self-reported number? Do we ask people additional questions if it's different than what the system expected? For example, was there a life change? Yeah, what's the trust in the number that we're saying, and what are we asking customers to do to validate or verify and give us as the administrator comfort that it's an accurate number?
Well, that's the thing that I'll get to and show in some of the findings. I think the discomfort is people estimating and talking about future miles, and the life event topic came up with a handful, certainly, of the people that we talked about, and they wanted to know, what happens if I do sell this car and I had prepaid? Is there a check coming back? Do I have to wait from the government, etc.? So I think one of the biggest answers here will come through, I think, one of the largest insights, which is discomfort potentially around the whole prepayment notion. There's a potentially simplifying aspect of literally just reporting miles, whether or not it's through a sort of odometer. I don't know, there's even a formalized name for it, a declaration of your odometer statement, and then basically just paying for what has actually occurred within the time period that has passed. So all I can say from individuals that either anticipate or were fearful of life change events, they, in addition to others, but they in particular were very kind of opposed to a prepayment situation because it put them in an awkward scenario of needing to basically get money back, even though they didn't drive or really use it yet from their frame of reference. There's a few other nuances around trust as well that we can get in there as well. And thanks, Travis, for teeing that back up for an answer. Let me go into the next pages as well. I wanted to give just a view into process. So there's one page here that helps you guys understand how we pieced everything together. So in speaking with 48 individuals, we had obviously the simulation we went through and a very detailed set of questions that we spoke to them about, key topics, if you will. Each of those direct verbatims or things that people said in the sessions, we kind of call observations from a sort of taxonomy point of view. And each of the sessions had several of them. I think noted on the left there, we had 70 hours of interviews and 2,434 observations. So those are things worthy of taking note of, is I guess how I would say that. What we then did, and we used a digital tool called Miro. I think in the old days, this was done with stickies on a board, etc. But we organized and clustered those insights to identify patterns and understand themes, and again, understand individuals. So I have a slide coming up here about the types of people that, even though we talked to 48 people that represent the 4 groups I spoke of above, how they saw the RUC experience. There's a set of archetypes that I'll share with you soon. And then finally, we were able to make complete sense of each of these clusters, and we expressed insights, which is what I'll share with you a bit later. And then the last slides in what I'll present are kind of tactical next steps, which we'll probably only scratch the surface on, but it talks about how we can improve the next generation of the simulation which is basically what the other part of the team is working on. Users, I wanted to talk about kind of how people's mental models, if you will, regarding their experience with RUC landed. People generally fit into 4 buckets, if you will. And as they were new to the WARUC experience in their first year, there were certainly more people that were on the left side, and or there were people on the left and right side. All 4 were relatively there. The folks that are on the right side, which we'll speak to in a minute, as they got familiar, basically after the 90-minute sessions ended, they started to morph and move into the sets of people that are on the left. So that's what the arrows are that are there for. Let me talk about the groups of people. So first of all, there were a handful. The first cohort was really people that we call them speed racers. They wanted to make it fast. They just wanted to know what's required and move on. Naomi, I think, gave a good verbatim. This is not an enjoyable task I want to spend a lot of time on. I just want to go through it quickly. So that gives a sense of like their mental state kind of and where they're at. The next group of people was more of we call them set it and forget it. They're interested in making it easy. They want to set up automated means. These were the people that over-indexed on, hey, yeah, I don't want to do basic reporting. I would actually try some of these automated methods because it's really about just easy. Even if it's work for me in year 1, downstream, it will be a lot easier. And Nathan's quote here, honestly, all these just sound like more work. I want the options which are more automatic. The third group, penny pinchers, make it cost less. They're, people that doubted it right here. I want to take my time to read so that I don't miss something and waste my money. So they spent a lot more time reading each of the sort of call outs to help understand and even toggle numbers, even go back to change a number to ensure that the little calculator that we had built for them was giving them the lowest number output. And then finally, there was a fourth cohort of people we called knowledge seekers, and they really wanted things to make sense for them. Scott's quote here, I get excited when I get to learn about something new, and I didn't know about any of this. Scott and people like him, knowledge seekers, they literally clicked, and they didn't just do it for us. They clicked on all of the click here for more information or learn more because they actually wanted to get to the bottom of what was going on, again, because most of it was new for them. Now, to the comment I made at the beginning that people through time sort of pushed to the left, the knowledge seekers eventually became somewhat satiated. They got some of the information they needed and were willing to kind of move through more quickly. And penny pinchers eventually mostly found the ways to toggle and move through the system and became more comfortable. So through time, people began to shift their disposition. So this slide, I think, in understanding sort of the mind state and where people's heads and minds are at, I think is important as we think about any solution for WARUC users and their experience. Any questions on this, just because I think it's an interesting kind of nuance? If not, you're welcome to bring one up or whatnot at the end. Actually, here we go. There is one here. Brian, please.
Thanks, Gabe. I appreciate you started this out with the 4 cohorts that were based on income and vehicle mix. And now you've got these divided, the same group, divided a different set of 4 ways. Is there any connection between the first 4 striation and the second 4 striation?
That is a really good question. And the short answer is there are some may over-index. For example, without checking the data, I would bet penny pinchers over-index on low income, for example. However, each of these groups are a bona fide new group, if you will, that are a blend of the above, because it's more about it's not demographics, which is kind of how the first group was associated. It's more about the underlying humans that they are and how they think. So again, we call these archetypes. And from a design point of view, these are what we're ultimately designing for. And this is an acknowledgement of kind of where they're at with respect to the stimuli that we presented to them.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. I love the quote up at the top about worldview goes beyond driving behavior.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to get into some insights. Certainly my favorite part. I've spent an entire career doing kind of the research and insight finding, and when that diagram I had earlier, the picture of all of those stickies and all of those clusters coming together, when all of that finally makes sense and you're able to crystallize it into a crafted statement and something that really matters and can move us forward is really what gets me excited. So I'm very proud to share our insights. Some of them are more obvious than others, but this is a collection along the range of that process. So in the beginning, with respect to the introduction to RUC, we do want to acknowledge that what we learned from our users is essentially how to look at all of these. DOL integration was intuitive. So back to the questions that were brought up, could this be somehow more integrated? Could or should it be? The way we've written this, people will have more trust and confidence basically if there is a completely integrated experience. The breaking of that sort of continuity of process was difficult for people. Shannon here is quoted as saying, I would want RUC and tab renewal to be a single service. It makes sense. And I'm just not sure why they're not there. And again, we heard something similar to this from a large number of individuals that went through it, on the order of half or more. The next insight from a reporting point of view, in fact, the next two are both a bit related to reporting. The first one here, basic reporting as a default is fine. And what we're talking about here is for your average Washington driver, the nuance of, detailed mileage or even detailed sort of record keeping to do exempt miles is a lot of effort, but they sort of, they found self-reporting to be sufficient and found like it to be heavier potentially if there was a lot of additional burden for exemptions and whatnot. In the case of uploading a photo for odometer verification, a simple step like that, they had no hiccups for, but as we'll talk about a bit later, heavier amounts of burden on them was hard for people to swallow. We had a QR code in there for people to kind of shortcut getting a photo from their phone into the system. So George wrote, hey, that's pretty slick to be able to quickly scan and send the photo from your phone. So in other words, if we lower the sort of friction bar and don't ask for too many things, people are going to be okay with it. In that third column, the second note on reporting, perception of compliance, this talks about sort of people cheating and whatnot, harmed confidence. Many people were quick to think that, even photos could be doctored and whatnot and easily spoofed, giving them a feeling of doubt in the program. And that doubt sort of translated across into other places then, because they're like, if I have a sort of lack of potential trust that I can see here and early in the experience, I wonder what the rest of it kind of feels like. Lawrence's quote here, the whole thing is ripe for being manipulated. And again, I'm just echoing back what some of the users said and how they kind of felt about it. It's on us to digest and interpret and even judge the relative merits and sizes of these. I'll pause right here. I see a question already, so I'll go ahead and take it.
Well, just on that statement, I think the whole thing will come out in the wash when the guy goes to sell the car. When they go to sell a car, they got to record the mileage. And so if the guy was cheating periodically during the whole thing, he goes to sell a car, it all comes out in the wash.
Yeah, well, the only challenge is that I totally agree with you. The challenge is that many consumers aren't necessarily thinking in full life cycles or into the future even. And if anything, this comment is really, I guess it really speaks to fear that humans have that other people might also cheat, or that the potential for trust across the board is weakened.
Really? I'm shocked you would say that.
Let me get into. Oh, here Travis wrote in the comments, and I will absolutely. It's funny. There's a nuance on this as well. The way that most people position it is they talked about other people might do these things. So there's that, and then there's actually a cohort of people that also a little bit surprised me. I was probably in almost all of the 48, 80% of them maybe, but the number of people that were overly honest, that were like, this is my duty, it's my responsibility, and I'm happy to pay it. So like there's a pretty wide range of perceptions of how people feel, but again, a lot of the cheating is projected on what others may do.
If I could follow up a little bit on that, is what happens now? Remember, this whole thing, correct me if I'm wrong, is based on, I drive a Ford Mustang, the manufacturer's miles per gallon is this much, and you're giving me a credit of that much. And what happens if I disagree with that?
Again,
I may drive a little faster than my wife, and my mileage might be 18, and my wife's mileage might be 22. You know, and so you're telling me that the manufacturer's mileage is 16. So
yeah, there's a lot of gray areas throughout this. I do want to acknowledge in our simulation, we didn't get into the explicit gas tax sort of rebate. So we didn't acknowledge your vehicle has an average mileage of blah, you're already paying such and such amount. It left that off the table.
Because that's kind of a fairness issue.
Yeah, there are a lot of them as a part of this program, and I think something that we'll have to be sensitive to throughout the course of defining what can be most ideal. I'll continue on the insights, but there is one more. Let me take it here. These are good questions. I'll take a couple, especially clarifiers, but if it's something we want to discuss for a while, we can make sure that we're using our time appropriately and keep them at the end. I'll take one more right now, though. It looks like we've got Bew.
Bo, yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think Senator Fortunato, I've talked with Rima and Travis quite a bit about this. For the purposes of a gas tax credit for RUC, we would have to go based on some set metric across the whole landscape, such as, the manufacturer miles. We just get a national list and use that. We wouldn't be able to calculate it based on actual driving habits at this point, just because of the data challenges there, right? It'd have to be something really uniform that could be easily applied across the whole spectrum of vehicles that are in the state.
Well, no, I agree with that. I agree with that. It's just that what happens if I disagree with your assessment? Is there a provision there, or you're just going to tell me how many miles you have this car, therefore we're giving you a credit of this much based on this many miles, and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, that's likely how it would apply. Although I do think, like with other items, there would be probably an appeal process for more just generically if there were, because there are sometimes errors in the data set, right? Like if the mileage for the vehicle is just wrong, because all that, is aggregated at a national level and made available. So I anticipate that we would have an appeal process, but I think in terms of calculating a credit, it would literally be that straightforward. This is just how the credit's applied, and that would be in, RCW or WAC or somewhere else, and that's how it would apply.
Yeah, I'll grab the mic back just to keep us on, but I don't necessarily mean to stifle the convo. In fact, I see another hand up.
Let's take Representative Orcutt's question before we move on.
Okay.
Well, it might actually be more of a clarification than a question, but kind of the way this is looked in the past is we would use the EPA numbers to do the calculation of what the per mile tax would be. So it's all going to come out in the wash anyway. If Senator Fortunato is concerned about how accurate it would be, I noticed that when I went off of, the self-reporting, then I was actually getting better fuel economy than what the EPA was saying. But when I went to the electronic without the GPS in it, suddenly it knew what my actual gas mileage was, and now I was actually paying a little bit rather than getting a credit. So, I mean, that would be one option to go to, is the electronic reporting, and that would give a little bit more accurate detail of what you're actually getting on a per mile basis.
Yeah, no, good inputs across the board. Let me continue with the fourth insight, the last column on this page. It has to do with estimations. And this one in particular, I think, was one of the larger findings from the study all up. Prepay and estimation, it's almost 2 points separate, but they're kind of included here together, and I'll tease them apart a little bit as well. But prepay and estimation is not intuitive to end users. People do not expect to have to prepay for estimated mileage. They find it confusing, unnecessary, upsetting. Naomi's quote here, "I'd much rather just pay for what I use." Estimating it just feels super convoluted and like more work for everyone. And we really got a response kind of similar to a lot of people. In fact, one of the ways that some of the users really tried to compare this was to sort of like metered water or metered electricity or other sort of utility services that people pay on a sort of metered amount of, and they're like, I don't prepay my water company, I don't prepay the electric company, and these things are very accurately measured for me downstream. So the sort of fact that people were prepaying was confusing for people and only kind of logically made sense as a sort of interim step for sort of revenue requiring purposes and whatnot. And sort of relating to prepay, the double whammy comes in because you're ultimately paying in advance on top of, having estimated what those miles are. And it just leaves consumers uneasy, confused, and not particularly in a good place. Let me it looks like I got a hand up here.
Yeah, this is Representative Pai. So you made reference to water and electric utilities. Most of them offer the ability to pay a constant amount over the year, as opposed to having the spikes in usage. How does this relate to the comment you just had about prepaying? You think it would apply with people who would find it a problem to have a monthly automatic payment that they made rather than a once a year type of thing?
Yeah, well, so thanks for the question. I want to acknowledge that we were able to test with users the notion of paying in installments, which is effectively breaking the large charge into multiple bits. But strictly speaking, that's a different thing than paying kind of in advance for the service that's being offered. So I guess the paying in advance is the part that kind of threw people a bit. And definitely people appreciated the ability to break down what might be a large sudden shift. I do want to acknowledge I'm data point of one. It's news for me personally that sort of like water and power companies have the option for you to sort of prepay into a pool. If that becomes more of a social norm for things, maybe it becomes more appropriate. But from what we heard from users and whatnot, at least at this time and what people are comparing it to, there was a sense that the prepayment part of it was not intuitive, but certainly installment paying, if there was no fees associated with it, was something of quite a bit of interest to people. Let me go to the next page. There's only 2 pages of our insights here. The next one relates to discounts. We want to acknowledge that discounts actually have a positive halo effect. And what we mean by this is that, you know, people expect and appreciate discounts, the people that actually need them. But it's true that people that don't even qualify for them saw that step in the process and sort of appreciated it as well. Darren's comment here, I think, is a good example of it. Nice, this is good. I worry about how it impacts people who can't afford things like this. So I think especially in the sort of modern times and the sort of cultural climate that we're in right now, the spirit of inclusion and looking out for each other, it's on people's mind, and having the option for discount is something that's seen as positive for all. The next point here about payment options, pay now was preferred to a point, and this really speaks to people that are okay to pay in full. By and large, people that can and they don't see what usually ended up to be about $150 or $200 charge, they would like to pay it now if they could, and if they couldn't, even pay now sort of positioned as a pay in installments, like pay on time, pay when I can and when it's ready, is basically something they want to do, mostly for what Christine has sort of acknowledged in her quote there. I like to pay now so I don't have to worry about it later. In fact, a nuanced comment that's not expressed here explicitly, the people that do have installment payments, they would like them to be automated or to have some form of reminder so that that process of making the smaller payments is made easy. So really the sort of mental burden of paying and remembering to pay is something that they want to rid. So that's why pay now is the preference. And then the last insight here is just like, it's a general insight about the whole thing. And I mean, we had 48 very different people. Some were very bright and, you know, angry about how they felt about things. Others were more smooth, but the reality is everyone was able to get through it. Regardless of how they felt about it, everyone completed the simulation. In fact, both years worth of stepping through it without failure. And I think Nathan's comment here kind of chalks it up a little bit for us. I would describe this site as much better than most government sites. Maybe we were a little kind with that particular quote, but people said, you know, this is a government site. I expect it to have a few places where I'm going to have to enter things and I might have to upload things and there might even be hiccups, and they kind of expect, even, I guess their bar is not very high generally, end users. So the fact everyone was able to get through it, they were able to point to where we could improve it. I think at least is an acknowledgement that Washington residents are okay with trying to digest something of this nature. Let me pause there as well if there were any questions about, I guess, these last three or anything from the prior page. And if not, don't worry, these same topics will be kind of back of mind. The last thing I'm going to share is what we are calling an experience blueprint. It's almost like a Cliff Notes, if we remember those from back in the day, the shorthand of how to approach the next build of this. So it's kind of our recommendations for the next build of the pilot experience. What we learned in the introduction, again, that's the part where we should really be focusing on instruction and education. I won't necessarily go into the nuanced detail of the bullets that are there. That's kind of the team picking up the bits of, but we learned, you know, this option of fast checkout or not was a little confusing in the first year. Most people probably need to be introduced to things. And again, nuance on how the learn more option would come through. We also learned little things like we don't want to drop things that probably are very commonplace to us, you know, the RUC, without qualifying what it is. Again, we had a nice icon in the top of the page, but it didn't come with what it all meant for users on the first time. So there were a lot of good reality checks, I think, when it came to bringing this to users. From a mileage reporting point of view, again, this is where they input actual miles and they do their sort of photo evidence. We learned that sometimes people add an extra zero or not, and we figured it would be good to have ways to catch erratic numbers or things that might be out of range, etc. I mentioned way earlier in our presentation that even things like language through people, exemptions is a pretty big word for some people, and we kind of had a one-to-one replacement at one point for out-of-state miles, which actually isn't exactly perfectly accurate either. So we need to take good care in how we talk about the different types of miles that may be exempt and how that information is presented to users in a way they can kind of understand. On a mileage estimation point, again, this is where they're inputting their estimated mileage and their exemptions for the next year. A lot of people asked for either tools or calculators so they could get at that, or at a minimum, quick references for what is typical. We only had kind of two options in there for people to choose from. They're kind of average for their zip or average for the state. And we found that people might want a few more to kind of land themselves in. So that's what we mean by ranges for mileage. And then if they seem overly high or low, and this is where I know we talked a little bit about the DOL account, and maybe some of this data exists somewhere, but there's, even if there's no explicit end user account, the data is held together, and there's an opportunity if they drove significantly more or significantly less than last year that might be able to be called out. On the reporting options bit on the final column there on the right, this is again where people are choosing between self and automated options. We had a kind of progressive disclosure, if you will, of what all those options are. So our recommendation is to bring all the options up at once and try to make it not too many. There were 4 total options. We probably want to back that down. And really some of the nuances around, like, is there a fee or a charge associated with this that was not as easily interpreted by the end user. So we want to make very clear what the service is, what the cost is, and what the benefits are. Users very often asked us for easier ways to compare things, even if it was in an explicit table. I mean, we asked people to make a lot of decisions in the course of this, and tools that we can bring to bear to help make those decisions are going to help significantly. The last 4 sort of tactical elements to improve the site for next experience. On discounts, this is again where people are selecting and verifying their participation. Ideally, users kind of asked for more options to be selected from. I know we had 12, but they were all state assisted services. Are there other parameters people still felt like they may qualify, but not within, even though there were 10, even the way it was defined? And also the second bullet there, rebates should happen just prior or in replacement of this step, so that people see all the adjustments kind of happening in concert, as opposing to a lot of different math occurring at different steps in the process. From a payment point of view, this is when people are seeing their payment plan. That is how often they're going to pay now, pay later, the method, you know, are they going to use a credit card, a bank, and all that sort of thing. We learned that there's a need to sort of redesign that summary panel to really show what the choices were, what the inputs were, and even potentially bring to bear some of the math, the equation. And again, we did many revs. We didn't see them today in this presentation, but on what invoices could look like. And if you brought some of the math to bear, but not too much scary stuff, how users would respond to that. So we got good insights on that as well. On review, again, that's finalization of all your inputs, understanding your total costs. People really wanted to see what is the per mile RUC rate? How are you getting to that figure in the first place? One of the biggest changes that we would know is we chose previous balance. People that didn't resonate with people as well. That would be the balance that is carried on the account from prior that they prepaid for. Again, both a sort of language and a terminology, but as well as, I would say, not altogether that many people understood that we were adjusting for things in year 2. People left even through 2 runs of it, first year and second year, kind of being confused, but going forward with what they're supposed to do because it's a required government site. So ways that we can improve clarity so people are getting it more is going to help. And then of course, including your email as a last step. A lot of people expect confirmations through email nowadays, not just a sort of splash screen, but we need to have their email to do that. And I'm fire hosing a lot at us, but only one column left. Confirmation, again, this is where we're confirming that their payment is there and that they've completed RUC. This one, we think it's important to basically redefine this step so that people understand that we're reviewing that you have paid and follow a lot of the best practice for e-commerce, and really make it clear that people are going back into tabs to complete, that they're not thoroughly done. We want to catch people's potential surprise factor if they didn't complete all of the process, including tabs. So that is a collection of kind of recommendations for the next pilot based on what we learned. Questions, comments, thoughts? That is the last slide. I can show either of these two or any of the insight slide if you'd like to ask, or really anything that we would like to chat about what we learned from users. I think we have 3 minutes technically by the clock, but I think we can chat about a handful of things before we take a break.
We have another 15 minutes set aside for Q&A, Gabe.
Oh, perfect, perfect.
You were just about right on the money with your timing.
So I guess the question is, the next version of the trial, we need to get it closer to having that integration with DOL in order to make this thing work. So Bo, what's your feedback on this, on integrating this with DOL, having DOL establish an account, having people be able to interface with subagents and things like that?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I got this presentation early from folks, so I was able to talk through it with, I don't think Gabriel, I should talk with you, but Travis and Rima, we did talk through some of these. And you know, this is how I contemplate when it is operationalized looking. I do think it's important to have both online and in-person options. And I do think utilizing the sub-agent network makes a lot of sense here, given their existing nexus to vehicle transactions. So I can see that. I can see having it integrated with the tabs, with the tab renewal process, or as part of your License Express account, you know, where you've generally got your vehicle, your driver. If you have vessels, you can add all those to your account, and then your RUC is almost like that next thing, right? It's a standalone item. You can integrate it with your transaction, but you can also go in there and just monitor where your RUC is, how your payments are right now, what your miles are. So it'll be interesting once, you know, when the legislature passes a bill. I think a lot of flexibility is going to be important for the agency as we work with the commission to utilize all the results from the pilots. And, you know, depending on if we want to have some of these other more technically sophisticated options available for customers, you know, we'll need to do an RFP for that with the vendor. Like I'm thinking of the plug-in devices or some of those, you know, obviously we're not going to be in the business of manufacturing anything, right? As an agency, we want to definitely use the private sector, but also make sure the state gets a good deal. Because we know, I think, from some other states, and Rima, feel free to chime in on this, that sometimes the take is extremely significant that those entities charge the state. And so trying to make sure we get the best value, but also have it be streamlined so that there can just be acceptance of the concept. And then, you know, as that grows and it becomes more widely used, then we can look at, you know, I'm sure the significance of the revenue generation will increase over time. So Travis, Rima, of course, I know we've had a lot of conversations about this, so I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that too.
Sure, I'll just briefly, unfortunately, Senator Fortunato, we're moving in the opposite direction for the next iteration of the pilot of literal integration with DOL. That is to say, because of the confusion people had around, oh, there's another step to go back to tab renewal in the way we simulated it with Gabriel's research, we'll actually kind of remove the DOL altogether from the next phase of the simulation for purposes of working out some of these detailed design questions about what steps go in which order, which questions do we put before people, and how do we ask them to interact with an interface. But that said, I think that it's in the broader zooming out, I think closer interaction with DOL, with Bo and Carl and Jill, and she's back, and other folks from DOL to kind of sit in on some of these design sessions and learn from what we're learning so that they're more prepared when the time comes for them to actually do it. We just aren't capable of literally integrating for pilot purposes with DOL, but we want to make sure that everything we're learning can easily translate into their drive system when the time comes.
Right. So Bo actually hit on one of my near and dear topics, which is cost of collection. And so if somebody does elect to use a GPS, they don't want to bother. Just going to do the GPS. You're just going to get a third party to do it. I would suggest that we stay out of the third party billing altogether and just let the third party send the data. We charge for the data. If you want to get a GPS and you want to pay this other third party so many dollars to do the calculation and run your bill, then it doesn't have anything to do with us. In effect, what that would do is we talk about trying to address people at a lower income. Either you're going to have to raise the RUC rate based on the collection method. If you choose to get a GPS, your RUC rate is higher because we're going to be paying it more. Or your RUC rate is lower if you do this manual method of reporting. And that way, lower income people can take advantage of the maybe a little bit more cumbersome but less expensive feature. So that's I guess, wouldn't you agree to make that a question?
Was that one for me, Senator Fortunato, or?
Well, I don't know, I'm just throwing
Yeah.
it out there, just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I guess since I'm just already off mute, I'll just say, certainly, yeah, we look to the legislature for some direction on how to approach that. But again, I think having that flexibility so that we can negotiate the best deal and look at what the market is offering us in terms of we only get some of these options if there is, the desire to have those. So I just think, yeah, and I think the past bills have reflected that. They've given a lot of latitude for DOL and the commission to come back with a more detailed plan and setting up that framework. So I think that makes sense. And then I think, yeah, to Travis's comment, I'd say, if it was the legislature's desire to have a more integrated DOL pilot, I think that's something we could do. It just that we would also need funding, obviously, because that's really significant integration with Drive, which is, it's a huge operational system serving 8 million vehicles in the state. So that's a big undertaking for us too, just as a sort of administrative and implementation lift to have that, right?
So you're looking for more money.
If you want the integration now for the pilot, it will take money for DOL.
And how much?
That I don't know, but I could estimate it if there's a desire for us to look into it.
I will preface this by saying that I asked DOT to put 2 porta-johns on the way to Greenwater, and their estimate was $164,000 a year. And for $25,000, they got 2 years covered by having the private people do it. So you got to come up with a good number there, Bo. Say DOL is efficient use of this stuff. Bo's a go-to guy. We're going to go to Bo. We're going to say, Bo, we want this to happen. Bo's the go-to guy. Right? Of course, if you screw up, Bo's the go-to guy for that too. So.
Bo's getting picked on. Sorry, Bo. if I could just chime in, I think Senator, your first kind of idea that we at least explore this in the pilot, I think we should. If people are not opposed to that, I think it's a good idea to kind of, it's an interesting notion to put forward to you, to potential participants to see what they would think about a varied rate, considering the fact that all collection methods aren't equal. Some are going to cost more to manage and administer than others, as well as kind of the concept of comfort level of working directly with a third-party vendor, and which we did test in our pilot and had a lot of uptake in that. But I think those trade-offs would be really interesting to explore in this kind of more detailed exploration. And then I think to the idea of doing a pilot at DOL, I think we would envision a startup program that's authorized will be so small scale that is one in the same, really. I don't know that doing a quote unquote pilot with an agency operationally is much different from just authorizing something small that could just start to be administered, because in that process you learn the same lessons, but you're collecting real money. And until we really shift to collecting real money, a lot of these questions will persist. So we would advocate for an actual program being authorized, but at a small scale, perhaps, that would be equivalent to what a pilot would be. And it could be a pilot program, but not a pilot like we did before in terms of a simulation.
Tom, do you want to go ahead? You've had your hand up quite a while.
Yeah, thank you. So just listening to this conversation, my first thought is that I think we might get into issues of equity if we create a program that only the rich can afford for the maximum perceived value, whatever that means. But the real question I wanted to have was Gabriel and the penny pinching group. Did you see people start to think about how they would manage their personal fleet and how they might imagine how at the end of the day this would cost them less by how they assigned one vehicle to a RUC and the other vehicle to just paying the gas tax?
And I'm trying to make sure I understand your question. I'd say only a handful of people we talked to had multiple vehicles or a potential fleet. Okay. And I think the way we set it up, we sort of imagined that it was the future and the world changed and that RUC was new and gas tax was sunsetting, just to keep it kind of simple. So kind of complexities that we've between that, which is I think where your question comes from. I don't think we have any insight on that explicitly.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions across any of the content that was presented this morning? If not, I certainly thank you all for the opportunity to present to you. If there are questions, feel free to reach out to Travis or others, and I'm sure we can funnel it in and we'll respond to that. But again, thank you, and I'll pass it back. I think Roy or otherwise will come in for potential break here in a bit.
Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break. Be back by 11 o'clock. Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and reconvene. Next up, Jing and Stephen will give us pilot next steps, design, setup, and recruitment.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning. This is Jing Fernandez. We're really excited to be back today to share with you how the user research that Gabriel just presented has shaped the pilot since we first presented it to you in December. So I'll present a breakdown of the schedule for the pilot and an overview of how the 10 mini pilots we presented last time have come together into a few simple coordinated user experiences that we'll be running participants through. Then Stephen Marfitano will present the details around how this is all coming together with recruitment, the more extended follow-on experiences for selected users, and also field research. So moving into the schedule, we're starting to solidify, excuse me, the dates surrounding the pilot. We are currently in the design and test phase, which officially started in May. Wait, sorry. You heard the results and findings of the most intensive portion of the design. And the deep insights from this phase are now being worked into a single, of course. They're being worked into a single, simple, streamlined web experience for users called RUC Basic. So this is the main pilot, which will be an experience that will take less than about an hour for participants to go through. And a few components of the pilot, such as the telematics, will continue on for self-selected participants for a few months as follow-on experiences. There are 2 mini pilots that have now been developed into 2 separate field research efforts that will be conducted with small, separate sets of participants. Stephen will provide an update on these in a little bit. The team is currently working on developing the website, the databases, the technology, and all the behind-the-scenes processes that will support the pilot. Once that is developed, we will then test it thoroughly from end to end to ensure that it works as expected. We'll make sure that there's no bugs and it's easy to understand. And all of you will get the opportunity to be some of the first participants to go through and try the website at the next steering committee meeting in November. So we'll be recruiting in September to ensure that we have the bulk of our participants identified by mid-November. And then the recruitment may continue through the end of December as needed, depending on how many participants are choosing the follow-on experiences. So let's jump into the RUC basic design. There are still so many interesting aspects of piloting a RUC in Washington, and Teague uncovered even more. And so that's why on the next slide, we'll show that we are always very mindful of staying focused on the main objectives of this project. So you're all very familiar with these and the supporting research, so I won't belabor them, but just wanted to put these up again as the Orion's belt, or the 3 stars that we're keeping our eyes on: the user experience, the cost of collection, and equity, each with their own specific questions that we must have a better understanding of at the end of this pilot. So on the next slide, Gabe presented the 12 steps on the left that we started with in the design phase. And then the research helped with streamlining these steps significantly. We found that some steps were more important to pilot than others to get the feedback we needed. Others were easier combined, and calling them out as a separate step made it actually more confusing to users. So this insight allowed us to more clearly guide users through each of the most important individual steps for road usage charge. We started with the ones in the left in May, and on the right are the ones that are going to make it into the RUC basic website that will be piloting with roughly 1,000 participants. The items in orange the manual mileage exemptions, the telematics, and the installment payment plans. Those are the portions of the pilot where self-selected users will have the opportunity to engage through follow-on experiences, which Stephen will be presenting shortly. Next slide. So for the 1,000 participants, we hope to validate the user experience findings with a larger volume of people mainly. Teague's research was a moderated, lower fidelity experience, as you heard about. The RUC Basic is a more fully fleshed out, self-guided experience for users. Users will be provided a URL to go to and navigate through. Then they'll be asked to take a brief survey immediately after. The WARUC team will be collecting data on how users click through the website. We'll be analyzing the choices that participants make, and the survey will help to gauge comprehension and gather perceptions and preferences, with RUC reduced down to its most basic components. We'll be gathering data to enable the extension of the findings to scalability, cost, and performance. Okay, my final slide here before turning this over to Stephen shows the decision points that users will be presented with. Having 1,000 participants going through this in a website and reacting to it through making choices will really inform what options are most desirable to Washingtonians. Travis, you can click through that a little bit more. So first of all, choosing whether or not they want to self-report RUC in a lump sum payment, no exemptions required, versus a lump sum payment and income qualified discount, choosing the form of mileage reporting without going into the details like we did in terms of experiencing each of the mileage reporting methods. Other than the automaker telematics, we have plenty of data with the mileage reporting methods from last time, but then recording these choices through their navigation through the website, their survey responses, and there will be a modest incentive after going through these. For 3 other areas where we're going to be monitoring user choices and letting folks choose, there will be follow-on experiences that will take a little bit longer. The first part is the first 3 or the basic RUC, we expect to take less than about an hour for both going through the website and all of the survey questions. These follow-on experiences can last up to 3 months longer as people do, signing in with the telematics or going through reporting. And so these will be looking at having them telematics connected and getting the data from the telematics. Next. Self-reported RUC with mileage exemptions, where folks are going to be submitting receipts, and these will be about 100 participants. And the last one is the self-reported road usage charge with installment payments. So a few installment payments following that first experience going through RUC Basic. And so by going through all of these, we'll be able to hopefully design the RUC system cost effectively, proposing user-friendly options, and also continue to maintain equitable system. All right, I'll hand the presentation over to Stephen now to present more about how we're going to recruit the 1,000 participants.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. So the recruitment we have divided into 2 basic approaches, and I'm going to go into greater detail on why we've selected this approach and what we're hoping to get from each. The first approach will be a statewide representative sample. So this is going to be a large group. We're contracting right now with a company to help us with this, and they will help us identify, contact, and push through this RUC Basic and through the survey 750 participants. So these people will be from all parts of the state and will give us a comprehensive overview of the opinions of statewide of RUC and of this experience. The second group that we're going to recruit will be for the follow-on experience. So these will be people that we suspect are eligible for participation in one of the 3 follow-on experiences, which were in orange on the previous slides. Enviro Issues and Ryan's team is going to be helping us with this process, and we'll be focusing on much of the same recruitment strategy as we actually used during the original Teague work. The first set of recruitment personnel people, or we were talking about people who live near a state border, or people who own a newer car, or people who are a lower income. And so those will be the types of groups that will once again be recruiting, hoping that those people will select into our follow-on experiences. So we'll go a little more detail now into the statewide representative group. So this sample is going to be coordinated. It will include a focus on all geographies, urban or rural, location within the state, race and ethnicity, age, gender, income, marital status, all of the sort of typical characteristics. The hope for this this group of our sample is not only will we be able to provide statewide statistics about people's preferences and perceptions of the RUC experience, but we'll be able to drill down into greater detail, looking at specific characteristics and how they responded to our, not only to the simulation and to the RUC basic and to the part where we're asking people to respond to RUC, but also the survey questions, right? So that we can bring back to this group more detailed information about how people are perceiving RUC in the state. The second group here, and I'll let you read for a minute. Yes, car ownership is definitely assumed. It'll be a prerequisite for all of our participants. So what you can see from the follow-on experience, and we wanted to highlight this, the goal really for the follow-on experiences is that people are self-opting in to these choices, that we're not identifying people and then strong-arming them into the experience. And so this is going to make our job a little harder, I think, because we're going to need to sample enough people that people are naturally selecting into the follow-on experiences. But I think it's more valuable because we're getting people that are buying into these concepts and these ideas, and they're choosing to participate. The three groups that we're going to focus on start with, Travis, slide. The installment payments. So this is people who we suspect we may have higher participation among low-income vehicle owners, although that won't be a requirement for opting into this follow-on. They'll have diverse vehicle types, uses, and areas that they live. The second group is telematics. Those are going to be newer cars. We're working right now to get a vendor under contract for that piece of the research. And we'll have a list of what they're going to do is they're going to provide us a list of vehicles that they can coordinate with the auto manufacturers to get the telematics information from. And so as we recruit, we'll know what vehicles we're specifically looking for, and we'll be able to identify if people are going to be eligible for this program. And then the third is manual mileage exemption. So this was the idea that somebody who drives frequently out of state or in state on private roads can choose to exempt some of their miles. I'll get into greater detail about all of the characteristics and the experience that each will have on later slides. No, so the ODB will actually be built in to the telematics. So that's what we're looking for, is vehicles that have that technology already on board. And so what's we'll get into more detail. It's a pretty exciting trial that we're going to be running. Go ahead, Travis. So now we're going to go into greater detail on the follow-on experiences, and we want to talk through how people are going to experience each of these research opportunities. And so we'll start with the installment payments. And so the green box first there, you'll see, is really meant to represent RUC Basic, the main simulation where all 1,000 people are going to go into it. And based on how someone answers questions during that, and if they choose an installment payment plan and they're eligible, we'll basically ask them, are you interested in doing additional research with us? And if they say yes, then we can opt them into this follow-on. And so then the orange sections will be the follow-on experience itself. And so it'll feel continuous for the user because sometime in November or December, they'll be completing RUC Basic. And then sometime in December or January, we'll be reaching out to them to continue the experience. But they will be transitioning into a separate phase of the research study. And so the important aspects of the installment payment plan is really a real life experience where people are trading money. So what we're going to physically, how it's going to look is starting in payment 2 and through payment 4, we'll be providing participants a cash card that will preload with the amount of money that they owe for their RUC. And the amount will be based on all of the answers that they gave us during the RUC Basic simulation itself, so that it really feels like, oh, now in January, I owe the state my first installment payment, or it'll actually be the second, but the first one I'm paying the state. We'll give them the cash up front early in the month and then ask them to pay late in the month so that there's some time separation in the experience. And that will, as they pay, the card will be reloaded and then they'll pay each month. The hope for this follow-on experience is to test how people perceive the experience, if they like it, if they find value in it. And we will be minimizing risk that people kind of run away with the money by doling it out over time and making sure that we're really tracking how much the state is at risk, I guess, during the process as they pay it back to us. And that'll all culminate in late in the survey or late in the process with the survey, probably around April, where we really can ask people their perceptions of what went on. The goals for this experience are really to understand interest. We are planning, as of now, to give a gas tax rebate or a credit against the amount that's owed for RUC during this RUC Basic experience. And so a person who drives an average vehicle might not necessarily own any RUC. So will be interesting to see how people choose how much money is owed to the state before they choose into our program. And then we will also know their demographic information. So, you know, what income ranges are most interested in this program. Of course, we're interested in compliance, effectiveness, complexity, and most importantly, cost of administration, because the amount of effort that the state needs to take to accommodate this program is, of course, of concern. The next follow-on that we'll talk about is, and let me take a break actually, see if anyone have questions, because I've been talking for a minute. Okay, I'll continue on. Go ahead and interrupt me or continue to ask questions in the chat if you have any. We'll talk about telematics. So this is a really exciting follow-on, I think. The flow is the same. People will opt into the program during RUC Basic. We will be pre-identifying the vehicles based on our vehicle list that we have. Is eligible for telematics. And our plan right now is to kind of flag that in the RUC Basic when they get to this question in the website and they have an opportunity to choose RUC. Draw a little attention to it. We're not going to force them into the program, but we do want them to see that it's there, because we really want to try to get all 50 participants that we're targeting identified into this program so that they can experience. So that's the big note here. Everything is optional, of course. If someone does choose to participate in our program, we'll be working with our vendor to provide their contact information. And our vendor will be reaching out with a signed data access agreement so that the vendor is able to buy from the auto manufacturer the data that we need for the time period that we need. And so our vendor, the way that we're running this pilot is, or this mini pilot and this experience, is really kind of how you guys were talking this morning about the state running a telematics program, where maybe an outside vendor could come in and administer most or all parts of this program for you. And so that's really the way that we're approaching this, where our vendor will be kind of representing that private entity. We'll, of course, have full oversight of how the process goes, and we'll be checking to make sure that the data that they're receiving from the auto manufacturer and that has been processed seems legitimate and is accurate. We have an opportunity to include our own vehicles in some of the trials and the end-to-end testing that we're going to do early on in the process, even before December and January, when we have our first participants involved, so that we can verify the legitimacy of the telematics data that's going to be provided. And so this, I think, is a really unique experience because, yes, we're testing our participants and the public, but we're also really heavily testing our vendor to see what is feasible and possible. And as part of their contract with us, they owe us some information about how much effort it's taking them, how much cost they're incurring, so that we can help the state understand that if a program like this was administered, how much it would cost and how much effort it would be. The other piece that's really exciting about this follow-on is the data that they'll be purchasing, since it's built into the vehicles, is supposed to come with GPS included. And so we'll be able to, our vendor has in their contract to include miles in state versus miles out of state. They won't get down to the level of private roads in state. I think that would be too difficult. But they're supposed to give us the breakdown of percent of vehicles in state versus percent of vehicle miles out of state. And so that would be one method that the state could use in the future for a mileage exemption. That would not, it would not, we'll talk about the manual option in just 1 minute, but that would be a technology-based solution that could be pursued. And so we're excited to see how that works, if it works. So much to be learned. And so here you'll see that we're assessing the user experience, of course, their understanding of telematics. But then those last pieces really talk about our vendor. How much is it to administer? Is it scalable? Does it work? How could it be expanded statewide? How could it be integrated into an odometer reading platform as an additional option, I guess, for the state to use? And then the final follow-on is the manual mileage exemptions. And so the basic idea behind this is somebody wants to testify that they drive out of state or on private roads a lot, and they want to exempt some of their miles. How could the state feasibly administer a program like this? And so we will be testing in the RUC Basic people's opportunity, once again in green, to opt into this program. And then we'll be enrolling them in December. The idea right now is to provide them instruction in December about what the process is and how it looks. I will say this pilot is interesting. This follow-on experience is interesting because there's still a lot to be determined about what the best way would be for the state to verify that miles were out of state. One way that could be done, and I would say this is all policy level decisions, but you could say people just say they did miles out of state and we just take their word for it. If the state wanted to dig deeper and ask people to provide evidence of their mileage out of state, that's really what we'll be exploring here to test the feasibility of that. And so we plan to provide instruction about what types of receipts we expect people to keep or what evidence might be acceptable. But we're going to leave this process a little bit open-ended for our participants so that they can really tell us what they think they would use to prove to the state that they had traveled out of state. And as the process moves through January through March, we expect that we'll be reviewing all the documentation that we receive, potentially revising direction to the participants if we want to kind of refine how we're talking about exempt miles to make the process better. But it's really a work in progress. And then at the end, we even have opportunity, all participants will experience a survey, but interviews with participants. Say we have some participants that are very good at proving their mileage to us. We may want to ask them questions, or if someone is not very good at proving their miles to us, we could learn as much from them. I have a hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Anna, listening. I saw that you had your hand up. I can allow you to speak now. If you still have it, I'm going to turn your mic on.
Yeah, I just had a quick question just to clarify. Is this is the pilot open to both EV car drivers as well as gas-powered vehicle drivers?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, all vehicle drivers will be eligible. Their eligibility for some of the follow-ons like telematics, in particular, if their car is not the right model and we can't get their data, they wouldn't be eligible for this follow-on, but they would be eligible for splitting their payments or for the manual mileage exemptions as well. So for this, we're really focused on assessing interest and then perception and how the experience actually goes. A big piece is the middle there. It's about the participant evidence, but it's also about the verification procedures. So we want to be able to advise you how much effort and cost we think it would take to administer a program if you had data vetting that you included, and how scalable that process could be for you. So now we'll talk a little bit about field research. And there's 4 main topics here that we're going to cover. These are all still work in progress. So we'll start first with the low income discounts. And we wanted to hit this again because it didn't show up in the telematics or in the follow-on experiences, because we've converted this research topic to more of a desktop research and coordination effort. So as we talked about this morning, part of this RUC Basic is to consider low income discounts. So we expect a similar approach to how Teague handled it during the 48-person interviews, where when someone gets to this section of RUC Basic, they'll have an opportunity to elect a low income discount if they're eligible for an existing statewide program. And so the effort is to piggyback off of existing statewide programs, food subsidies or housing or medical assistance that people, also electrical assistance, all the sort of state programs that DSHS already administers, with the intent that we need to coordinate more directly if we wanted to implement this with DSHS to identify how we could verify that someone is already eligible for a state program, and that would be how they would opt into this aspect of the RUC experience. And so for right now, from the user's perspective, there's going to be the question during RUC Basic. They're going to have a chance to opt in. We'll apply a 20% discount, and then we'll be able to ask people at the end of the RUC Basic during the survey how useful or meaningful this program is to them, whether or not they elected into the program. So we'll be able to tell you more concretely, and I guess with the statistical statewide group, that yes, people found this valuable or they did not, and an important aspect of RUC. In the meantime, we're also doing continued research, and we'll continue to work with, I think we're slated to work further to explore how technically and behind the scenes, this research would be incorporated into a process that could be run by the state in the future. The next research topic is unregistered vehicle research. So this is something I know you guys talked about last December. So the high level, this is research focused on how many vehicles are currently driving without valid tabs. So when people need to register, and they lapse, how long do they lapse for? And so much research has been done about this already. I know that we're originally planned to conduct field research to go out and find license plates to take pictures of and record whether the tags were valid. That piece of the approach is not going to be carried through because there was already good research and documentation from DOL about registration renewals. And so we're in the process of wrapping up summary and findings for this, and you'll see that soon from us. The next topic is vehicle transactions research. So this is an interesting aspect. It's sort of based on the idea that we want to identify all of the opportunities the state might have to reach out to or to get information from vehicle owners on a more recurring basis, not just at their vehicle registration. And so we're going to be doing some outreach with participants to identify when they actually do transactions related to their vehicle. And those could be leveraged to either get odometer readings or collect payment. And so that process will be going on, probably overlapping with the follow-on experiences over the next few months. And I'll take a break. I see a hand up.
Yeah, my question is back on the unregistered vehicles. Are you going to look at what the impact of RUC would be on getting people re-registered in their vehicles? In other words, if somebody gets behind as a result of implementing RUC, what is the cost for them to catch up, and how much does that deter them in getting that vehicle registered as opposed to just remaining unregistered?
I don't know. Travis, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's not one of the explicit questions we'll be looking at. We were mostly interested in what's the extent of lapsed registration, and DOL already has done analysis and reported on that. So we'll basically be collecting that up and reporting it out along with some best practices from motor vehicle agencies regarding helping customers in that situation you described. But we won't actually be collecting any original data about that.
Any other questions? All right, I'm nearly done, if that gives anyone a sense of relief. So I think we've covered this one. So the final topic, research topic that we're working on is a mock standards committee. And so the idea behind this topic is to start to identify how states and private sector partners could standardize RUC in order to reduce costs and enhance the user experience. And so the goals for this program are to invite and convene a mock committee, but a real committee of individuals where we could start having conversations about what the most pressing concerns are in terms of administering RUC and standardizing practice. We're anticipating now that we'll be identifying the major pieces of this research will be to figure out how to invite and convene the committee and to identify the right partners for that conversation so that we got all the right opinions at the table. And separately to start figuring out from a RUC perspective exactly which topics are the highest priority for standardizing standards or identifying standards. And then we can start working through the process of identifying what this group thinks the standards could look like in the future. And so that'll also be going on over the next few months. And I think that is my last slide. I'll stop if there's any questions or comments. All right, I'll turn it back over to Chair Jennings.
Well, thank you. Very interesting. So next up is member discussion, questions and comments. Does anybody have a question or a comment that they would like to have? Any discussion on anything? Oh, you're making this go fast. Senator,
Just my only concern is, we hear talk about racial impacts and things like that, and I don't quite understand what somebody's skin color has anything to do with this. The lower income people, if we start separating out lower income people from every program that we're doing, how in the world would that be administered? And people are worried about somebody cheating on filling out an affidavit saying they went out of state when they didn't. But the potential for people getting onto this lower income thing to get a discount, I think would be very high. I mean, that's a guess. I just think the program ought to be fair. It ought to be just across the board, whatever it is. Lower income people don't get a break on gas tax. Why are we considering that on the RUC? And if we're worried about affecting lower income people, we should lower the RUC charge. So those are some of my comments. And again, my focus is on the cost of collection. Getting too high. If we're willing to give away a third of the money in order to collect it, taxpayer pays $1 and we get 65 cents. That doesn't seem to be very fair and equitable. So we want to make sure that whatever collection method we do, it be economical enough for those lower income people. And then if somebody wants to pay extra to have a GPS in their car for convenience, so be it. I mean, that's why people with more money drive in the toll lanes when other people don't. That's my considerations. Thank you.
thank you. Representative Orcutt.
Mr. Chair, so I will kind of tag on to what the senator said. My understanding is RUC is supposed to be a user fee. A user fee, you pay for what you use. And if we start discounting for anyone, then people are not, I mean, it starts to defeat the purpose of RUC, the underlying purpose of RUC. So that's something that needs to be considered in the discussions here. And I just want to kind of get back, and this is what I really wanted to get at, was the unregistered vehicle issue. We know we have a lot of people that are unregistered now. And my concern is if we go to a RUC and now your registration is based on you paying, your mile tax, does somebody suddenly get behind and now it's a greater burden to get that vehicle re-registered? It's now more expensive. And that goes right to the whole issue of low income. Does this become much harder for the lower income individuals to get their vehicles registered and stay legal in our state?
Anybody else? Okay. So with that, I want to thank
Commissioner Jennings, we
everybody
have, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have one
Go ahead.
more question from Anna Lissing, I see. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, this is Anna Leasing. I'm Energy Policy Advisor to Governor Inslee. Just wanted to respond real briefly to Senator Fortunato's concerns raised about tiering and structuring the road usage charge to drive more equitable outcomes. One, I think, we need to be really cognizant and acknowledge the historical harms that were done to low income and communities of color. I think it is disingenuous to say that we're all working off a level playing field when historically a lot of these communities have been disenfranchised and actually shut out of communities where they're working. And so as a result, have had to move further out and thus experience longer commute times and housing and affordability. So there are real structural and, government-driven harms that were created that I think we would be remiss to not address. And so, that is a real need for making sure that we are not just maintaining status quo and what the transportation burden is that low-income households are experiencing under a gas tax, and then maintaining that in a road usage charge. This is a real opportunity for us to address the harms that were created through very intentional systemic policies. And then secondly, the question about potential fraud of folks joining into low-income programs, assistance programs, in order to get a road usage charge discount. I would just flag that it's actually quite burdensome to apply to assistance programs. It takes a lot of effort and time. So I'd be very surprised if folks were taking time off of hourly wage jobs, which don't often give PTO, in order to try to game a system for 20% discount.
So am I to understand that you're in agreement that lower income people have a higher burden based on their income, and that the governor's office will go along with a potential tax cut by eliminating the sales tax on prepared food and clothes in order to address that inequity? Can I count on the governor to do that? 87% of that would go to lower income people. So
I think extrapolating into broad terms and not discussing specific policies where we haven't had a chance to weigh in and view the details might be a bridge too far. But yes, we are very much focused on addressing how the kind of status quo has impacted low-income communities and communities of color. And we are interested in addressing how to alleviate the disproportionate transportation burden that low-income households are currently experiencing.
And I would suggest that we start talking about, instead of communities of color, that we start talking about communities of Washingtonians, because we're all affected. But that is a topic for a whole different discussion that we will move to another, and we will remove that from the RUC conversation. So thank you for your consideration.
Representative Clipbourne.
Yes. Can you hear me? I can't tell for sure.
I can.
Oh, good. I don't want to get into a discussion that we've just had around this particular issue, because if we don't talk about this as a direct replacement for the gas tax, we're going to lose the battle. We will not get people to come on board. So it cannot be a part of engineering how we tax the poor versus the rich. The gas tax has had sort of a knife that's sharp. It goes right through everything the same way. And so I would like us to step back from that conversation as we go forward, because when we go public with that, or with this, it's going to be a big enough pull to just get everybody to understand that this is a necessary tax to keep access for everyone. So I don't disagree with the issues around impacts on poor people and all of that, but it can't be a part of road user charge, in my opinion.
Any other questions, comments, or discussions? Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to add in that, it's not just the poor that have been driven out of the urban areas and into the suburban or more rural areas. There are a lot of middle income individuals that have been forced out because of extremely high housing costs. And so their commutes are now longer as a result. So, if the impetus for giving a reduction is the harm that's been done to certain communities as a result of having to be pushed further and further away from their jobs, that cuts across a number of income levels and not just those who are low income.
Rima.
Senator, did you have something you wanted to add before I?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I just wanted to also just clarify, I'm sure most of you will get this, that we're looking at the discount options in this research purely to provide perspective and data. I think, as you can see from this discussion, there's varied opinions about the purpose of discounts and whether or not they should be provided. And of course, there's the financial impact that will be further fleshing out as the research continues, so that the legislature can have that policy debate. But at this time, I just wanted to clarify that, you know, we're not under the guise that this is a recommendation or an intended recommendation of the steering committee or the commission. But we are trying to make sure we look at all aspects of how this potentially could get implemented so that it can inform that discussion during the legislature. And then I also would just, I don't have it handy at the moment, but when we shared our equity analysis work back in the spring, we had some pretty interesting conclusions, and one of them was in this great chart that really shows the stratification of income segments or household incomes. And then on the lowest incomes under 30,000, based on our research, indicated that less than 4% of household, low income household costs are a derivative of RUC or gas tax. And when you blow that up, over 90% of those costs are coming from other things aside from the gas tax or RUC, primarily vehicle ownership. So kind of to the point of, you know, where do we bring, if there's a desire to bring relief to low income taxpayers, how is that done? It would appear that RUC or gas tax, for that matter, is probably not going to bring a lot of material relief to low income households.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
I just want to say thank you to Representative Clyburn for that very thoughtful analysis. Thank you.
Strange bedfellows.
All right, thanks for attending today's meeting, everyone. Our next meeting will be in person, believe it or not, SeaTac Airport Conference Center on Thursday, November 17th. We're going to start at 9 a.m. Unless anybody has anything else, this meeting is adjourned.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.